On this Tuesday night, grilling the Kielburgers. The brothers who co-founded the We charity faced the Finance Committee about that controversial contract.
We did this to be of service to the government.
And their ties to the Prime Minister.
You're hanging with their family. Come on.
The Kielburgers say they wish they'd never accepted the contract in a hearing full of frustration.
There'll be order, I'll suspend the meeting, and that's it.
Bowing to pressure the public inquiry just ordered into the Nova Scotia mass murders. Mandatory masks in a Canadian resort town.
It can get quite crowded and squishy.
The rule that will apply even outdoors. And pregnancies making waves.
We're very happy that she's pregnant again.
Cautious optimism for the orca population.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. The brothers at the center of the controversy over the multi-million-dollar student grant program spent hours being grilled under oath today. Craig and Marc Kielburger, co-founders of the We charity, told MPs they agreed to a contract to administer a $543 million federal program, not $912 million, which is the figure the government used. And they said they wanted to make a difference. They said they would not have made any profit off it. The sole source contract was pulled after it was revealed members of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's family were paid to appear at We events. His mother, Margaret, got $250,000. And the finance minister, Bill Morneau, and his family took 2 trips with We in 2017, only reimbursing the charity last week for $41,000. The Kielburgers said today they had no idea how the whole affair would be perceived.
We would never have picked up the phone when the civil service called if we had known the consequences. The young people would not get the help they need now, and the 25 years of We charities programs helping millions of youth would be in jeopardy.
The Kielburgers used their appearance before the Finance Committee to defend their organization and deny reports they were in any financial trouble, and that's why they needed the contract. As Abigail Bimman reports, even after 4 hours of testimony, there are still unanswered questions.
Without prior consent or approval. Mr. Polyev, do I have to suspend this meeting? Because I will.
Testimony at times tense as MPs pushed to get all their questions answered.
My next question.
That was
well, I'm. That's right, and so I'm not. So the floor is not yours.
A challenge, even though Marc and Craig Kielburger were in the hot seat for 4 hours.
We did this to be of service to the government, not for the government to help us. And it is incredibly unfortunate, the fallout that has occurred.
The brothers said they wanted to set the record straight, that they didn't stand to profit from the deal, long touted by the government to be worth $912 million. Newly released documents mean the total amount is still unclear.
First time we heard about the $912 million was when it was announced. We had never been privy to that information before. Secondly, is that the contract is up to, as you said very correctly, the $543 million.
They offered some numbers, average expenses paid to the Trudeau family for their appearances, but didn't offer a total, saying they'd provide more documentation later.
Per event?
So came to a total of 28 We days over a span of 5 years, specifically speaking on the issue of mental health. From 2016 to 2020, the average expense there was $5,998.
There were lots of questions about the We Charity Foundation, the separate organization the Kielburgers say they use to protect themselves from liability.
We were very concerned about the request that we were asked to take on a liability for 40,000 young people.
Don't you get that this looks kind of dodgy to the average Canadian?
And the opposition wanted to know why We isn't registered to lobby.
Previous up to this point, we've had virtually very limited engagement with the federal government seeking funds. And they, at this point, approached us.
You're hanging with their family. Come on.
The opposition were certainly frustrated. I mean, these guys are incredibly slick.
More unanswered questions around mass layoffs and a big board turnover, including the chair's resignation.
I did have a number of concerns, yes.
Michelle Douglas testified the board repeatedly asked the executive for reports to justify those layoffs, but never saw them.
We were being denied access to the chief financial officer. We had sought 2 meetings with them and they were both canceled.
4 hours of testimony is very unusual. So too is the appearance of a sitting prime minister at committee. Justin Trudeau and his chief of staff will testify on Thursday. Donna?
Abigail Bimman in Ottawa, thanks. The Kielburgers have a long history doing charitable work. 27-year-old Craig and older brother Marc are co-founders of We and call themselves humanitarians and social entrepreneurs. It started in 1995 when Craig was 12 with Free the Children, which focused on stopping child labor and expanded to reducing poverty and improving sanitation and education for kids. The Kielburgers built it into a worldwide organization.
Never could have imagined that today 500 schools built, 27,000 microcredit cooperatives, 1 million people we work with around the world.
They wrote best-selling books and built a powerful brand, forging ties with politicians of all stripes and with celebrities. In 2008, they launched a for-profit company called Me to We and became known around the world for their star-studded We Day events.
Make some noise for Selena Gomez!
Many of the questions now stem not only from the close ties to the Trudeau family, but from WE's complicated organizational structure, which includes registered charities, for-profit businesses, and holding companies. After intense pressure from the families of victims of Nova Scotia's mass shooting, the federal government announced today there will be a full public inquiry.
Be a great relief to everybody. We're all traumatized. Of course, the families of the victims more than others, but all of us have been through this together.
The move by the government is a big upgrade from the joint federal-provincial review announced last week. It did not have the power to compel witnesses to testify and was denounced by families of the victims as useless. Elizabeth McSheffrey is with me from Halifax. Elizabeth, why the change now, and what will it mean in terms of getting answers?
Well, as you've said, the review that was announced last week was met with tremendous backlash here in Nova Scotia, with hundreds of people marching on the streets in the last 2 days. But it really has been the last 24 hours here that have been so astonishing. It's in the last, this afternoon we had 5 federal Liberal MPs break the ranks and call on Ottawa to proceed with a full public inquiry. And that split in federal unity is what prompted our Justice Minister here in Nova Scotia to say that if Bill Blair decides to go ahead with a public inquiry, our government here will support that as well. And a statement now from the Public Safety Minister's office says the new inquiry will include the power to summon all witnesses, evidence, and documents deemed necessary to proceed with the investigation. That means, of course, fulsome participation from the RCMP and some answers for Nova Scotians on how this atrocity took place and whether it could have been prevented. We did speak this evening to one of the families of the victims. Harry Bond lost both his parents, Joy and Peter, in the attack. He says he learned about this latest news on Facebook and he's overwhelmed. It made his day, but he says the family should not have had to fight for this development. So one thing we'll be watching for in the days to come is confirmation from the federal government that this new transparent process will be able to make binding legal recommendations. We'll also be watching to make sure that it's going to include a close look into how domestic violence played a role in what happened and what socio-cultural elements might have contributed to any of the shooter's motivations for committing this horrific atrocity.
Elizabeth McSheffrey in Halifax, thanks. Now to the pandemic. Health Canada has approved the antiviral drug remdesivir to treat patients with severe symptoms of COVID-19. It's the first drug to be approved for that use in Canada. Remdesivir will only be given to patients over the age of 12 who have severe pneumonia symptoms and need oxygen to breathe. The drug is administered intravenously and patients are closely monitored. Several countries, including the United States, have already conditionally approved remdesivir. Access to the drug could be difficult, though. The U.S. government has purchased nearly the entire global supply. Canada's chief public health officer said today this country is in discussions to access that limited supply. Dr. Theresa Tam also shared her concerns about what she calls the worrisome trend of Canada's COVID-19 curve ticking up.
If we overtax the public health resources and lose this ability to effectively test and trace, well, let's not go there.
Tam is again encouraging Canadians to limit their number of social interactions and to continue practicing physical distancing and proper hygiene. Wearing a mask is strongly recommended as another way to reduce the spread of the virus, and many jurisdictions are making them mandatory in public indoor spaces. The town of Banff is going a step further. It's just voted to make masks mandatory outdoors in the downtown core, which gets very crowded with tourists even in the middle of a pandemic. Heather Yourex-West reports.
Nestled in the breathtaking Rocky Mountains, Banff National Park is a treasured tourist destination, and not even a pandemic is keeping visitors away. It's a concern that has prompted Town Council to adopt an unusual new bylaw. Effective Friday, with a few exemptions, most visitors will have to wear a mask, not just indoors, but in some outdoor areas too.
We believe at this point that we're the only municipality in Canada, and I don't know beyond that, that has put a mandatory mask bylaw in place in an outdoor space.
Man, can I get you a free mask?
Outdoors, masks will only be required in the town's downtown pedestrian zone, an area that has already been closed to vehicle traffic to allow for physical distancing.
We do have some retailers where there tends to be some lineups. We have some very popular retailers, and just even when people are going in and out of stores, it can get quite crowded and squishy.
By simply creating this entire zone where people are going from door to door, continually entering and leaving indoor spaces that would require a mask, it's far simpler and far safer to not have those people frequently adjusting and removing their masks and then putting a new one back on.
Banff isn't the only popular tourist destination dealing with big crowds. This video was taken earlier this month in Niagara Falls, Ontario. Days later, the region announced a mandatory mask bylaw for indoor spaces, while outdoors, staff have been hired to educate visitors on the need to maintain space. And at Vancouver's Third Beach, where a large crowd gathered for a drum circle last week, there is a new reminder from BC's provincial health officer to behave.
There's some very stern posters of me that have been put up to dissuade people from congregating in large groups, so maybe that'll be effective too.
Measures taken to allow summer fun to continue, even under the persistent threat of COVID-19. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
The tourism industry around the world has taken a huge hit from COVID-19, and we now have a snapshot of the financial impact. The United Nations World Tourism Organization says the tourism industry lost more than $420 billion globally between January and May. That's more than 3 times the loss during the 2009 global economic crisis. In May alone, international tourism fell by 98% compared to last year. Well, if you can work from home but are looking for a change of scenery, Barbados has an offer for you. The island nation is launching international visas that allow foreigners to live and work remotely from Barbados during the pandemic. The Barbados Welcome Stamp is good for 1 year with some conditions. Your salary must be above $66,000 a year. You need to have your own health insurance, and there's a non-refundable application fee up to $4,000. Barbados has just over 100 confirmed cases of COVID-19. An unprecedented homecoming in Halifax. Coming up, HMCS Fredericton returns after a tragic trip overseas. Plus, deleted the viral video full of fiction about COVID-19. What a sweet surprise for this lucky sailor. HMCS Fredericton returned home to Halifax today after 6 months at sea, a long time to be away from loved ones. That first kiss wasn't the only moving moment for those who came home from Operation Reassurance. The NATO-led mission will forever be remembered for a deadly cyclone helicopter crash off the coast of Greece. 6 crew members of HMCS Fredericton were killed. And as Ross Lord reports, it made today's homecoming bittersweet.
For these Navy sailors, 6 months has made a world of difference. After they sailed off to the Mediterranean Sea, the global pandemic struck, restricting their movements.
We weren't allowed going to shore no more. That was a morale buster right there.
And a tougher gut check was coming. On April 29th, the ship's helicopter crashed into the ocean, killing all 6 people on board.
Our crew was just totally amazing, phenomenal, and we had each other's backs and we kept each other going.
The crash happened close enough to the ship for some sailors to witness, but the frigate continued on with its mission with the same crew for another 3 months before finally turning for home.
We embarked a Padre
we embarked 2 social workers and executed a very robust plan of interviewing the ship's company and affording them access to those mental health resources.
For 3 months, families of the deceased have been reflecting on the lives that were lost. Sub-Lieutenant Abigail Bimman's father, who himself serves in the Navy, says his daughter loved adventure.
Riding motorcycles was a passion and a hobby. Watching her play her bagpipes will be something I'm going to miss. But then there's the more personal items, walking her down the aisle when she decides to get married, first child, those types of things that just won't ever happen.
For others, a long absence means a long embrace, even if emotional reunions were moved to a separate location to avoid overcrowding.
We've all been working together in our own little quarantine world, right? And now we're back in the real world.
It's been a long 6 months. Yeah, it's with COVID hitting and everything else, and not having family around. It's been a challenge, but he's home, hopefully for a long time now.
Still making adjustments, but at least they're home. Ross Lord, Global News, Halifax.
Scholarship or stunt? Still ahead, how Facebook is partnering with a Canadian university to fight hate online. An Ontario teenager has pleaded guilty to terrorism charges relating to a bomb plot in the name of the so-called Islamic State. The 17-year-old, originally from Syria, was arrested in January of last year. He was 16 at the time and can't be identified because he's still a minor. The plot involved a plan to use a pressure cooker bomb to target bars and nightclubs, as well as members of the police and the military. Canadian authorities learned of the plot after an undercover informant tipped off the FBI. An Ontario university has teamed up with Facebook to try to stop the spread of hate online. Ontario's Tech University is tasked by Facebook Canada to spot online hate and misinformation and to develop strategies and tools to counter it. The university's Global Network Against Hate will receive $500,000 over 5 years. Professor Barbara Perry says it's a good start, but that Facebook has a long way to go.
Are they doing enough? No, they're absolutely not doing enough. We will continue to push. And I think that's part of what this relationship is about, is, providing the information that Facebook needs to move forward and continuing to apply pressure and to urge them to make the kinds of changes that need to be made in terms of both their human capacity and their technological capacity for responding.
Dangerous misinformation still gets shared millions of times on social media, often unchecked. Today, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube did remove a video, but only after it went viral. It shows a group of people in lab coats who call themselves America's frontline doctors.
Because there's a lot of inaccuracies with the testing, and also even if the test is...
The video, published by right-wing media outlet Breitbart News, was shared millions of times, including by President Trump, before it was taken down. It claimed falsely that the anti-malaria drug hydroxychloroquine is a cure for COVID and that you don't need a mask to slow the spread of the novel coronavirus. Next, an orca in BC gives scientists something to celebrate after a heartbreaking loss. Russian scientists are digging to find the rest of this woolly mammoth skeleton. Locals discovered the bones near a Siberian lake. Some parts still have soft tissue intact, which is remarkable because the woolly mammoths went extinct some 10,000 years ago. There's been a dramatic rise in temperature in Siberia recently that's melting the permafrost and revealing these ancient skeletons. And you may remember the orca J35. She was the endangered southern resident killer whale who 2 years ago carried her dead calf for 17 days. It's a story that shows the powerful bond between a mother and baby. As Jennifer Palma reports, that orca is now pregnant again, and she's not the only one.
It's a picture that's led to a lot of excitement, an indication an endangered family is getting ready to grow.
We're very excited about it.
J35, also known as Tahlequah, is the mother orca who made international headlines in 2018 when she carried her dead calf around the ocean for 17 days, traveling more than 1,600 kilometers.
There's been interest in them for 30 and 40 years.
Dr. Lance Barrett-Leonard, director of the Marine Mammal Research Program with OceanWise, says it's not unusual for orcas to do this for a short period of time, but J35's apparent tour of grief shows her emotional attachment to her calf. J35 is now 22 years old. She also has another calf. The one she's carrying now is expected to arrive next year.
They have suffered unusually high mortality in the last few years, and so they've got to make it up with reproduction. So, you know, every calf that's born, and there's only been a trickle of them over the last few years, we watch with great interest.
Researchers are keeping a keen eye on southern resident killer whales because their population is in a critical state. There's only 73 of them remaining, and their gestation periods are long, lasting up to 17 months. So every pregnancy is important. Scientists say there are 3 things threatening them: contaminants, underwater vessel noise, and lack of food, in particular Chinook salmon.
They struggle to get enough food, and we know from the collaborative work done between the Canadian researchers, myself, and my colleagues in the U.S., that the southern residents are consistently thin.
But there's another glimmer of hope. Researchers have found another orca, L72, who is also expecting. Both pregnancies being watched carefully, not just by researchers, but by their own pods. Calves and mothers spend their lives together.
It's a testimony, really, to how resilient they are, that they're still around now.
Jennifer Palma, Global News, Vancouver.
And that is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Stanley, Nova Scotia, about an hour north of Halifax. Beautiful sunset. We'd love to see Your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.